The sun rose slowly over the rolling hills, casting golden light across the Cherokee village nestled along the banks of a wide, flowing river. The air was crisp with the scent of dew-laden earth and blooming wildflowers. Birds sang in the treetops, and the river's gentle murmur provided a constant soothing rhythm to daily life. In a small wooden cabin with a roof of hand-hewn shingles, Ahuli, a Cherokee father in his late 30s, stirred awake. His wife Noya was already tending the fire, placing a small pot of cornmeal over the embers. Their children, Ahina and Dakota, still slept, their soft breaths rising in the morning light. Ahuli stepped outside, inhaling deeply, letting the warmth of the rising sun fill him with gratitude. This land had been his family's home for generations. The river provided fish, the forests offered game, and the soil yielded corn, beans, and squash. Every stone and tree seemed infused with the memory of ancestors, whispers of old stories, songs and lessons passed down through countless seasons. Ahuli's father had once told him, "The land is more than dirt and trees, it carries our hearts. To leave it is to leave a part of yourself behind." He had understood the words in his youth, but now, as he watched his children stretch and yawn, he felt the truth of them more deeply than ever. Noya called softly, "Ahuli, the children are awake." She handed him a bowl of corn mush, steaming and sweetened with a little honey. Ahuli knelt by the table, watching his children rub sleep from their eyes. Ahina, the eldest at 10, smiled and said, "Papa, today I will help Mother plant the beans near the riverbank." Dakota, 7, clutched a small wooden carving of a wolf he had made the night before, his eyes wide with curiosity. The family ate together, sharing stories of the morning hunt, lessons learned from elders, and plans for the day. Outside, other families in the village performed similar routines, women preparing meals, men checking traps, children laughing and playing under the watchful eyes of their elders. There was a sense of unity, a rhythm of life that had endured through generations. By mid-morning, Ahuli walked to the river to inspect the fishing nets he had set the previous evening. He paused to admire the water's clear surface, seeing the reflection of trees and sky mirrored in its flow. A family of ducks paddled by, and fish darted beneath the surface. He marveled at the abundance around him and silently thanked the spirits for their generosity. In the village square, elders gathered under the large council tree, discussing matters of importance. Today they spoke of trade with nearby communities, the upcoming planting season, and preparations for the midsummer ceremony. Elohi, a respected elder with silver-streaked hair, recounted stories of the ancestors, of the land's history, and the lessons of perseverance and harmony with nature. Children sat quietly at his feet, absorbing every word. The village's tranquility, however, was tinged with subtle tension. Word had begun to spread of changes in distant government policies, laws that threatened to remove native people from their ancestral lands. Most villagers had not yet felt the full weight of these changes, but whispers traveled quickly along the river paths and forest trails. Ahuli listened carefully to passing traders who spoke of officials visiting neighboring tribes, of papers signed and orders issued. The concept seemed abstract at first, impossible even. How could one force a people from land they had called home for centuries? Despite these shadows, daily life continued. Ahuli and Noya led their children to the riverbank, where they began planting beans. The soil was soft, warm, and fertile, holding promise of the coming harvest. Ahuli guided Ahina's small hands, showing her how to press each seed gently into the earth, covering it with care. Dakota attempted to mimic them, pressing seeds too deeply or shallowly, but Ahuli laughed softly and corrected him with patience. By midday the village hummed with activity. Women wove baskets, repaired clothing, and prepared food for the afternoon meal. Children ran barefoot along paths lined with wildflowers, their laughter echoing across the fields. Men checked the traps, hunted small game, and discussed the weather and river conditions. Elders observed quietly, offering guidance when needed, and telling stories that grounded everyone in their shared history. In the distance, Ahuli noticed smoke rising from a small fire near the edge of the forest. He walked closer and found a group of women collecting herbs and roots. their movements precise and careful. They greeted him warmly, asking after his family, offering advice on the best routes for healing, and reminding him of the upcoming council meeting. The sense of community was palpable. Everyone relied on each other. Everyone shared the burdens and joys of life. As the afternoon sun climbed, Ahuli returned to the cabin. Noya had prepared a simple meal of corn, beans, and roasted fish. They ate together, discussing the day's work, the children's lessons, and plans for the coming harvest. Ahuli felt a deep sense of contentment, even as the distant murmurs of change persisted in the back of his mind. After the meal, the family gathered near the fire outside the cabin. Ahuli told stories of the ancestors, of brave men and women who had defended their people, of the spirits that watched over the land. Noya joined in, singing soft melodies that had been passed down through generations. The children listened, their eyes wide, absorbing the lessons of courage, wisdom, and resilience. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the village, Ahuli walked along the riverbank once more. He reflected on the day, on the beauty of the land, the strength of the community, and the sense of belonging that came from living in harmony with nature. Yet he could not shake the unease creeping at the edges of his mind. The whispers were growing louder, spreading from neighboring villages, and carried by traders and travelers. Something was coming, something beyond their control. Noya joined him, taking his hand. They stood together in silence, watching the river flow, feeling the pulse of the land beneath their feet. She spoke softly. "Whatever comes, we will face it together, with our children and our people." Ahuli nodded, drawing strength from her presence and the certainty of their shared bond. As dusk fell over the Cherokee village, the first stars appeared in the sky. Fireflies flickered among the trees, and the river shimmered in the fading light. Families gathered in their cabins, sharing meals, prayers, and stories. The village seemed eternal, resilient and full of life, a living testament to centuries of connection with the land. Yet even in this calm, the winds of change whispered through the trees. Orders had been issued. Soldiers would arrive, homes would be abandoned, fields would be left untended. The life they had known, the land they had cherished, was on the brink of being ripped away. And so, as the Cherokee people drifted into sleep that night, the stars twinkling overhead, none could fully know that their world was about to change forever. The silent exodus was approaching, a journey that would test their endurance, their faith, and their very sense of identity. The morning dawned bright and clear, the river shimmering as if nothing had changed since yesterday. But for the Cherokee village, the quiet peace was about to shatter. A column of soldiers approached along the main path, their boots pounding the earth, rifles slung across shoulders and expressions stern, almost mechanical. The officers carried papers and proclamations, the official commands that would alter the lives of the village forever. Ahuli noticed them first from the ridge near his cabin. He felt a sudden chill, his stomach twisting with unease. Noya, sensing his tension, stepped beside him. "Who are they?" she asked quietly. "They come with the orders," he whispered. "We must listen." The soldiers entered the village, their movements precise, leaving a trail of unease behind them. Children stopped playing, dogs barked, and adults paused in their work. Whispered warnings passed quickly from person to person, and soon the villagers gathered in the square. At the front, Captain Jameson, a man with a cold, impassive expression, unfurled a document and began to read aloud. "By order of the United States government," he intoned, "all Cherokee people residing on these lands are hereby required to relocate to the territory west of the Mississippi River. Families are to prepare immediately, taking only what they can carry. Non-compliance will be met with enforcement measures." A hush fell over the crowd. The words seemed unreal, a cruel impossibility. Ahuli felt as though the ground beneath him had disappeared. Noya clutched his arm, eyes wide with fear. "Relocate? But this is our home. Our ancestors have lived here for generations," Ahuli shouted, his voice trembling with outrage and disbelief. Captain Jameson's expression remained unchanged. "Orders are orders. Compliance is mandatory." The elders of the village stepped forward, their faces lined with worry and sorrow. "Elohai, the eldest among them, spoke with quiet authority. "We cannot leave this land. It is our heart, our soul. The river, the forests, the mountains, they are part of us. To leave is to die in spirit, even if we live in body." Jameson shook his head, dismissing the plea. "The law is clear. You may gather your belongings. You will be escorted westward. Any delay will be treated as resistance." The villagers stood frozen, the enormity of the proclamation settling on them like a heavy fog. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, eyes wide and confused. Some women fell to their knees, praying aloud, while others buried their faces in the hands of their husbands or friends. Men tried to speak, to bargain, to resist, but the soldiers' presence was overwhelming. Ahuli's mind raced. How could they leave? How could they abandon the graves of their ancestors, the sacred grounds of their people, the cornfields ready for harvest? He thought of the small cabin, the riverbank where he had planted beans just yesterday, and the life that had seemed so ordinary, so eternal. All of it was about to be taken. Noya, sensing the despair in Ahuli, tried to maintain composure. She gathered their children close, whispering words of comfort that she barely believed herself. "We will survive," she murmured. "We have our family, and we will find strength together." The soldiers moved among the villagers, marking families, counting heads, and issuing instructions. Some tried to gather as much as possible, food, tools, heirlooms, but the orders limited what they could carry. Each small item packed into bundles represented a piece of home, a fragment of memory, a symbol of identity. Ahuli carefully packed their most precious possessions, a small wooden carving of a bear, a quilt made by Noya's mother, and a few pots and tools. Neighbors shared what little they could. One woman pressed a bag of dried corn into Noya's hands. "You will need this," she said softly. "Take it. Keep your children safe." Even as the villagers prepared, the weight of the soldiers' presence was unbearable. There was no debate, no choice, only compliance enforced by strict orders and the looming threat of violence. Some men whispered plans of resistance, but the officers' rifles reminded them that disobedience carried deadly consequences. The village elders convened in hurried council, their faces etched with sorrow. Elohai spoke softly but firmly. "We have no choice but to leave. But we carry our people, our stories, and our spirits with us. The land may take our bodies, but it cannot take our hearts." Ahuli felt a bitter knot in his chest. He looked at the children, bright-eyed and innocent, unaware of the full magnitude of what awaited them. He tried to summon courage, to embrace the role of protector. But even his resolve trembled under the weight of despair. By midday, the villagers had gathered their belongings. Families moved slowly, carrying bundles of food, blankets, and small treasures. Horses and carts were scarce. So much of the march would be on foot, and the elders understood that the journey itself would be deadly. The younger men tried to lift spirits, sharing small jokes and reassurances, but the underlying fear was inescapable. As they began to leave, the village seemed to mourn itself. Dogs followed, whining softly, and some refused to leave their owners. Smoke rose from abandoned hearths, carrying with it the scent of home, of meals once shared, of laughter and stories. The river, so central to life, reflected the sun as though it too grieved the departure. Ahuli led his family out of the village, taking one last look at the hills, the trees, and the familiar paths. Noya clutched the children's hands, whispering encouragement and prayers. The elders brought up the rear, their faces solemn, carrying memories of ancestors and the knowledge that this journey would claim many lives. The soldiers guided the march westward, enforcing the pace, reminding the Cherokee that there was no turning back. Children grew tired quickly, their small legs straining under the weight of packs and the long hours of walking. Some stumbled and fell, only to be gently lifted by parents, the harsh reality of the journey already visible in the first day's steps. Ahuli's mind was filled with questions he could not answer. How could the government justify this cruelty? How could people leave behind the graves of their ancestors? How could they survive the journey that stretched hundreds of miles through unknown lands? Yet there was no time for reflection. The march continued relentlessly, guided by soldiers whose only concern was compliance. By late afternoon, the column reached the edge of the forest. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the ground. Families set up makeshift camps, small fires flickering as people rested, ate, and tried to regain strength. The children huddled together, weary and frightened. Ahuli held Dakota close, whispering stories of courage and hope, while Noya tended to Ahina, soothing her worries. Even as night fell, the fear lingered. The village they had left behind seemed to call to them across the distance, a memory of home that was already fading. The trail of tears, as it would come to be known, had begun, and the Cherokee people were stepping into the unknown, carrying their lives, their heritage, and their spirits into a journey of suffering, endurance, and resilience. Ahuli stared at the darkening sky, the stars beginning to glimmer faintly above. He took a deep breath, drawing strength from the presence of his family and the solidarity of the people around him. They were leaving their land, yes, but they were not leaving each other, and in that small truth lay the fragile hope that would sustain them through the trials to come. The sun rose pale and muted over the horizon, filtered through thin clouds that hinted at a long, arduous day ahead. The Cherokee families stirred from their makeshift camps, eyes heavy with exhaustion from the first night on the march. The air smelled of smoke from last night's fires, mingled with the damp scent of the forest floor. Children rubbed their eyes, shivering from the early morning chill, while adults prepared to continue the journey westward. Ahuli rose first, feeling the ache in his shoulders from carrying the small bundles of his family's possessions. Noya stirred beside him, quietly gathering the children and checking the contents of their packs. Dakota's small legs trembled as he stepped onto the muddy path, and Ahina clung tightly to her mother's hand. "Papa, how far will we go today?" Dakota asked, his voice trembling with fatigue and fear. Ahuli bent down, brushing damp hair from his son's forehead. "As far as we must, my child, but we are together. That is what matters." The column of villagers moved slowly through the forest, guided by soldiers with rifles and strict orders. The path was uneven, covered with roots and rocks, and the occasional slope tested the endurance of even the strongest adults. Children stumbled, crying, and parents scooped them up, carrying them alongside their own burdens. By midday, the sun climbed high, relentless in its heat. Thirst began to gnaw at the travelers, and the water they carried dwindled quickly. The river that had nourished their ancestors was left far behind, replaced by distant streams and uncertain terrain. Families rationed their food, sharing small portions of dried corn, nuts, or a handful of beans, each bite measured and precious. Illness soon began to appear. Exhaustion, exposure, and poor nutrition weakened the villagers. Ahuli noticed elderly grandmother Suli leaning against a tree, her face pale and lined with pain. Her grandson, barely 12, knelt beside her, holding her hand as tears rolled down his cheeks. Noya pressed a damp cloth to her forehead, murmuring prayers and gentle words of comfort. The march was not only a physical trial, but an emotional one. Each step reminded the Cherokee of what they had lost: homes, sacred lands, and the familiar rhythms of village life. Ahuli thought of the riverbank where he had planted beans, of the cabins where families had shared meals and stories, and of the graves of ancestors left behind. He felt a grief so deep it pressed against his chest like a heavy stone. Despite the suffering, small acts of humanity persisted. Villagers shared blankets, offered water to the sick, and encouraged one another with quiet words of hope. Ahuli lifted a fallen child into his arms, stroking his hair gently as Noya whispered encouragement. They told stories of the ancestors, of strength and survival, and tried to instill courage in the children's hearts, even as the shadow of fear loomed large. By afternoon, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, turning the dirt path into thick, clinging mud. The march slowed, bodies slipping and sliding as soldiers barked orders to maintain formation. Wet clothes weighed heavily, chills crept in, and morale waned. Ahuli's back ached from the weight of his pack, and he could hear Noya comforting their children behind him, whispering, We must go on, we are strong, we will survive. Food became scarcer as the day wore on. Some families shared what little they had, while others went without. The children's stomachs growled, a constant reminder of the harsh reality. Ahuli tried to distract them with stories, singing quietly as Noya hummed in response. They spoke of the animals in the forest, of rivers they would one day see again, of ancestors who had endured hardships far worse. The column paused briefly near a small stream to rest, allowing travelers to drink and wash their weary feet. Some villagers knelt at the water's edge, whispering prayers of thanks, while others simply sat in silence, gazing at the reflection of clouds and trees. Ahuli cupped water in his hands and offered it to his children, watching their relief as they drank deeply. The stream, though small, was a temporary comfort in a journey defined by loss. Night fell early, the sky shrouded in clouds, and the families made camp along the roadside. Fires were lit, the smoke curling into the darkness as adults tried to cook meager meals. Children huddled close, exhausted from the day's exertion. Ahuli and Noya sat together, sharing a small portion of dried corn, their hands intertwined as they watched the flickering flames. Whispers of despair filled the air. Families mourned loved ones who could not continue, sick villagers left behind, or infants too weak to survive. Some wept openly, others silently endured the pain, finding strength in unity. The journey had only begun, yet the weight of suffering already pressed upon every heart. Ahuli thought of the elders, Elohi among them, and the wisdom they had imparted. The land may take our bodies, but it cannot take our hearts. He clung to these words as he whispered them to Noya, who nodded, her eyes filled with tears yet resolute. The night passed slowly, the cold seeping into bones, sleep broken by cries of children and the moans of the sick. The soldiers enforced order, and the march would resume at first light. Ahuli held Dakota close, feeling the boy's rapid heartbeat against his chest, a fragile reminder of life and hope amid suffering. When dawn arrived, it brought no relief. The road stretched endlessly before them, muddy and pocked with stones. The march continued, each step heavy, each breath laborious. Hunger, illness, and exhaustion tested every family, yet the Cherokee pressed onward, determined to survive. They carried not only their physical burdens, but the memories of their land, their ancestors, and their community. By the third day, the column had grown quieter, the energy of the first morning replaced by a somber determination. Children walked more slowly, some leaning on parents for support. Elders moved with careful steps, their wisdom guiding those who were younger, offering encouragement and prayer. Families shared small comforts, a warm word, a portion of food, a gentle touch, holding on to the humanity that the march sought to strip away. Ahuli's family pressed on, step by step, mile by mile. Noya whispered prayers with each stride, invoking the spirits of their ancestors. The children learned to endure, their small hands clutching their parents, their minds absorbing lessons of resilience, courage, and unity. Though grief weighed heavily, hope persisted in quiet acts of care, in shared laughter that managed to surface even amid tears, and in the determination to survive together. The trail of tears had begun and its cruel reality was clear, but through it all, the Cherokee carried their culture, their love for one another, and the unbroken spirit of a people forced to leave their home, yet unwilling to surrender their identity. The fourth day of the march brought relentless rain. The path had become a quagmire, sucking at boots and slowing every step. Children's cries pierced the air, some from exhaustion, others from hunger or the cold seeping into their bones. Elders groaned beneath the strain, their frail hands clutching bundles of food and belongings that seemed impossibly heavy now. Ahuli's shoulders burned with pain. Noya's face was pale, streaked with mud, but her eyes were resolute. She pressed a small bundle of dried corn into Dakota's hands. "Share with Ahiena, my child. We must ration carefully," she said. Some families could not continue. The sick, the elderly, and the weakest were left behind temporarily with a small contingent of soldiers, to follow later, or, in many cases, to perish along the roadside. Ahuli witnessed an elderly man collapse, his grandson weeping beside him. Ahuli knelt, holding the man's hand, whispering words of comfort even though he knew it was little more than a fleeting gesture against the inevitability of death. Despite the sorrow, life persisted. Small acts of compassion illuminated the darkness. A woman shared a scrap of blanket with a shivering child. Men lifted fallen neighbors to their feet. Children, though exhausted, tried to comfort each other, singing soft lullabies or repeating stories of the ancestors' bravery. Every step forward was a testament to endurance, even as the land and the elements seemed to conspire against them. Every step forward demanded strength he did not feel. Yet in the eyes of Noya and the children, he found the courage to continue. They would survive together, even if it cost every ounce of energy he possessed. Along the path, families buried those who succumbed to illness, exhaustion, or hunger. The mourners dug shallow graves beside the road, marking each with small wooden crosses or carvings. Every burial was a painful reminder that survival came at a staggering cost. Children witnessed death for the first time, some too young to understand, some old enough to carry the weight of memory forever. Ahuli held Ahina's hand tightly as they passed a newly dug grave, whispering, "Remember them, child, but we must keep moving. Life continues even through sorrow." The rains did not relent. Clothing clung to bodies, footwear was ruined, and mud coated every exposed skin. Soldiers shouted orders, urging the villagers onward. Ahuli watched one child stumble and fall, and a soldier's boot nearly trampled him before Ahuli intervened. "He is a child," he shouted, voice cracking with anger. But the soldier only shrugged, indifferent. The world seemed cruel and indifferent to human suffering. By the second week, the column reached the hilly regions, where the terrain became steeper and more treacherous. Children clung to parents' hands, some unable to continue without being carried. Families sang songs softly, hoping the melodies would keep despair at bay. Ahuli's body screamed in protest with every step, yet he could not rest until his family had safely crossed each rise. One night, Noya whispered to him as they huddled beneath a thin canopy of branches, "Ahuli, we will make it. Somehow we will reach the new land, and we will build again. The ancestors are with us." Ahuli nodded, tears streaming silently down his face. He did not speak, for no words could convey the depth of grief, fear, and hope interwoven in that moment. Chapter 5. The Silent Exodus continues. Weeks passed, and the journey stretched farther than anyone had imagined. Some nights, they slept huddled on the frozen ground, the wind cutting through every layer of clothing. Food was scarce. Hunger gnawed at stomachs, turning limbs weak and spirits fragile. Children cried themselves to sleep, and parents wept silently, praying that the morning would bring strength. Ahuli watched as families were reduced in size. Fathers, mothers, and children disappeared along the route, claimed by disease, exhaustion, or the unforgiving cold. Each loss carved a hollow in the hearts of those who survived. Yet the survivors pressed on, driven by the necessity of endurance and the love that bound families together. In the quiet moments when the column paused to rest, elders told stories, tales of their ancestors' resilience, of hunting and planting, of rivers, mountains, and spirits that had guided their people for centuries. These stories became lifelines, reminders of identity, culture, and connection to a land they could not yet see again. Ahuli repeated the stories to his children, teaching them the names of rivers, the spirits of the animals, and the lessons carried through generations. By the third week, the soldiers' discipline was harsh. Stragglers were reprimanded or forced to move faster. The line between guidance and cruelty blurred, and the march became a test not only of physical endurance, but of willpower. Families clung to each other, each small gesture of care a rebellion against the dehumanization surrounding them. Despite the suffering, moments of humanity persisted. Ahuli saw villagers share water and food, nurse the sick, and comfort children with gentle hands and soft words. The march forged a fragile solidarity among strangers, a communal spirit that carried them forward even as despair threatened to overwhelm. Chapter 6: Arrival at New Lands. After weeks of hardship, the column finally reached the designated territory west of the Mississippi River. The land was unfamiliar. Rolling plains, forests unlike the ones they had known, rivers that smelled different, soil that demanded new techniques for planting crops. Families were exhausted, their bodies broken, yet relief flickered in their hearts. They had survived the Trail of Tears. Ahuli looked across the plains, seeing families scattered along the riverbanks, children leaning on parents, elders trembling but still alive. Noya knelt in the dirt, touching the soil, whispering prayers of gratitude to the spirits. Ahuli joined her, bowing his head and letting tears fall freely. The survivors began to build shelters, gather food, and establish small communities. They planted crops in the unfamiliar soil, hunted local game, and tried to reconstruct what had been lost. The memory of home haunted every step, every planting, every meal shared. Yet through sorrow they carried resilience, teaching children the names of ancestors, the songs of the land, and the stories of survival. In time, the Cherokee adapted to the new lands, though the losses would never be forgotten. Families mourned the loved ones left behind, the children who had died, the elders who had fallen. But they preserved their culture, passed on traditions, and ensured that the story of the Trail of Tears endured in memory, song, and spirit. Ahuli held Dakota in his arms, watching his children play near the river that would now nourish them. He thought of the land they had left, the lives lost, the grief endured, but also the courage and resilience of his people. The journey had been horrific, yet they had survived. And survival was not only a physical act, it was an assertion of identity, memory, and the unbroken spirit of the Cherokee people. Generations later, the Trail of Tears remained etched in the collective memory of the Cherokee. Descendants told stories of endurance, of sorrow and resilience, of the courage of those who marched across hundreds of miles under unbearable conditions. The land they had once called home remained a sacred memory, while the lands to the west became a testament to survival and adaptation. The silent exodus was more than a journey. It was a profound act of endurance, a story of humanity tested to its limits. Though countless lives were lost, and culture threatened, the spirit of the Cherokee endured. They carried their history, their songs, their traditions, and their connection to the land into a new chapter of life. And, through it all, they remembered those who had fallen, honoring their memory with stories, ceremonies, and the unbroken continuity of their culture. The Trail of Tears was a wound in history, but it was also a testament to the strength of a people who refused to let their spirit be erased. And in the quiet, among the plains, rivers, and forests of their new home, the Cherokee lived on, holding fast to memory, hope, and the unyielding courage of their ancestors.